Israel has denied that its military troops are advancing towards Damascus by going beyond the demilitarized buffer zone. At least 3 people were killed and 20 injured after a Russian strike hit a private clinic in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia.
A 92-year-old Japanese man who lived through the American atomic bombing of Nagasaki called for an abolition of all nuclear weapons as he accepted this year's Nobel Peace Prize. The prize was awarded to Nihon Hidinaku, a grassroots movement of Japanese atomic bombing survivors who work to maintain a taboo around the use of nuclear weapons.
兵器国とそれらの同盟国の市民の中にしっかりと核兵器は人類と共存できない、共存させてはならないという信念が根付くこと、自国の政府の核政策を変えさせる力になること、それを私たちは願っております。ガザ地区に対して
The group expressed fear that the taboo around the use of nuclear weapons was weakening, expressing sadness and anger at Israeli and Russian threats of the possibility at using nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons have grown exponentially in powers and numbers since being used by the US on Japan in the Second World War. Syria's new interim leader Mohammed al-Bashir announced he was taking charge of the country as caretaker prime minister until March the 1st, with the beginning of the former rebels who toppled President Bashar al-Assad only days ago. The departing government met with al-Bashir for the first time on Tuesday since Assad fled Damascus over the weekend. Al-Bashir told reporters after the meeting that the ministers discussed transferring the portfolios to the interim government during the transitional period until the beginning of March. Elsewhere in Syria, people continue to celebrate for a third day and shops and banks reopened, despite Israeli airstrikes across the country. The Biden administration said it will recognize and support a new Syrian government that renounces terrorism, destroys chemical weapon stocks, and protects the rights of minorities and women.
Israel denied that its military troops are advancing towards Damascus by going beyond the demilitarized buffer zone, which separates Israeli-occupied Golan Heights and Syrian territory. The capital city, as well as the coastal city of Latakia, have been the target of Israeli airstrikes since the fall of al-Assad's regime. Israel claimed the wave of airstrikes is an attempt to destroy key military infrastructure. On Tuesday, Israel's defense minister Israel Katz confirmed that the military successfully destroyed Syria's military fleet.
אני מזהיר מכאן את מנהיגי המורדים בסוריה. מי שילך בדרכו של אסד יסיים כמו אסד. לא נאפשר לישות טרור אסלאמית קיצונית לפעול נגד ישראל מעבר לגבולה ותוך סיכון אזרחיה. נעשה כל מה שנדרש כדי להסיר את האיום.
Katz also said they intend to establish a demilitarized zone in southern Syria in order to prevent attacks on Israel. Meanwhile, at a press conference, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded to the growing criticism over Israel's takeover of the demilitarized buffer zone and said Golan Heights will remain part of Israel for eternity. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrived in court, taking the stand more than 4 years after his trial on charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust began. Netanyahu is accused of granting regulatory favors in exchange for positive press coverage, as well as receiving gifts in return for political favors. The Prime Minister maintains his innocence and says the 3 cases against him are politically motivated.
שמעתי בתקשורת שאומרים שאני רוצה להתחמק מהמשפט. שמעתם את זה? כן. אני רוצה להתחמק. איזה הבל הבלים. 8 שנים אני מחכה ליום הזה. 8 שנים אני מחכה להציג את האמת.
The corruption case has long divided Israel, and both supporters and critics gathered outside of the courthouse.
כדי להביע תמיכה בשלטון החוק, כדי להתנגד נחרצות לעובדה שיש לנו ראש ממשלה שהוא גם נאשם בפלילים וגם פושע מלחמה.
הוא המנהיג ברמותיי, ניצח את החמאס, ניצח את הדאעש, ניצח את הסורים וגם ינצח את בית המשפט.
It is the first time an Israeli prime minister appears in court as a criminal defendant. The trial had been postponed several times already, first because of the COVID-19 pandemic and more recently because of Israel's war in Gaza. The European Union's foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas urged that the transition of power in Syria after the fall of Bashar al-Assad should not descend into retaliation between opposing factions.
The transition will present huge challenges in Syria and in the region. First, there are legitimate concerns about the risks of sectarian violence, extremist resurgence, and the governance vacuum, all of which must be averted. We must avoid a repeat of the horrific scenarios of Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan.
Kallas called for the protection of all Syrians, including minority groups, as well as the freedom of religion. The top diplomat said the first signals coming from the rebel forces were good, but that it is too early to issue a verdict. She said the coming weeks are therefore crucial to see if Syria's political situation continues in the right direction. At least 3 people were killed and 20 injured, many of who are in critical condition after a Russian strike hit a private clinic in the city of Zaporizhzhia. Among the victims were 2 doctors and a 5-year-old girl. The strike also damaged buildings nearby. In a post on social media platform X, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the strikes prove that Ukraine needs to enhance its air defense systems. He added that Kyiv submitted all the necessary requests to its partners to do so. The attack came after the Ukrainian president said he's open to the potential deployment of Western troops in Ukraine. Zelensky has said that this would bring Ukraine a step closer to joining NATO. Meanwhile, at least 11 were injured as a result of a double ballistic missile attack on the town of Slaropil in the Kharkiv region. An administrative and 16 residential buildings were damaged, that is according to local authorities.
Days after Romania's presidential election result was declared invalid due to alleged foreign interference, the European Commission has avoided commentating on the decision. However, it is still investigating the social network TikTok and its role in the electoral process, in which independent candidate Călin Georgescu won the first round.
We're now consolidating and assessing all these pieces of evidence that we have received, and based on that, we'll decide on next steps with regard to TikTok.
The feeling among several MEPs is that the Chinese social media network has turned a blind eye to the possible use of its algorithm by a state actor, suspected to be Russia.
They have permitted electoral publicity which was not marked properly. They have permitted electoral publicity on election day which was illegally. And they have permitted the campaign of a candidate being funded with many millions of euros, although that candidate has publicly indicated a budget of €0 for his whole campaign.
But some MEPs think the Constitutional Court's decision to annul the elections went too far.
On parle d'une dictature, le début d'une nouvelle dictature. On parle bien d'avoir tué la démocratie de cette manière. On parle bien de la réinstauration d'une forme de totalitarisme.
Others applaud the court as they believe that citizens will now be able to count on a fair trial.
I don't think a manipulated election means that the rights of the citizens are respected.
Brussels has not said whether it will take action on the possible violation of the Digital Services Act by TikTok.
Protests in Georgia entered a 13th day despite arrests and physical attacks against activists and opposition figures. Protesters gathered outside the Georgian parliament building in Tbilisi, chanting and blocking the street. Police have detained an increasing number of people as the crackdown on anti-government protest intensifies. The ruling Georgian Dream retained control of parliament in the disputed October 26th election, a vote widely seen as a referendum on Georgia's EU aspirations. The opposition and pro-Western president have accused the governing party of rigging the vote with neighbouring Russia's help. Protesters say they will continue to demonstrate against this injustice for as long as it takes until their demands are met. Fishermen in Spain continued their strike protesting proposed European cuts that would largely restrict the number of days they can fish in the Mediterranean. The European Union wants to decrease the number of fishing days for Mediterranean trawlers by 79% in an effort to improve fish stocks and protect biodiversity. Protesters argue that these cuts would badly harm Spain's economy and damage the fishing industry. They also believe the EU's plan is based on flawed data and does not take local fishermen's concerns into account. Representatives within the fishing industry agreed that the proposal could lead to the disappearance of trawling. The field reportedly employs around 3,000 people on board and generates a further 17,000 jobs indirectly. EU fishery ministers are continuing to discuss the proposal in Brussels.